Hello and welcome. I'm Jocelyn Goldfein. I'm a managing director with Zetta Venture Partners. We're a proud sponsor of the MIT AI conference. And we are a San Francisco venture firm that invests only in startups who are employing AI to solve problems for businesses. I'm really excited about today's panel because I have four really phenomenal entrepreneurs, and I'm going to bring each of them up for a kind of a fireside chat. And I think all four of them are interested in taking some audience Q&A. So if you have the app handy, go ahead and tee it up. And you're welcome to submit questions even before we get started. So let me begin with Catherine Havasi. Catherine is the founder and chief strategy officer of Luminoso. Luminoso uses natural language processing to turn raw text data into actionable business insights. For example, classifying customer support tickets or understanding the drivers behind NPS scores. Luminoso was founded out of research Catherine was doing as a member of the MIT Media Lab, and she also got her bachelor's and master's from MIT studying computer science and natural language processing, and she also holds a PhD from Brandeis. Welcome, Catherine.
Hi.
So I'm curious, at what point, so this started out as a research project. You were at the MIT Media Lab, you were working away on research. At what point did you think, hey, this could be a company?
It actually took a fair bit of time from, I think we thought it could be a company from the beginning, but actually making it happen took a really long time. Anybody here from the Media Lab or familiar from the Media Lab or did a Europe in the Media Lab? A couple of Media Labbers, that's awesome. Yay. So, yay. The thing about the Media Lab is a little bit different is because we work with companies rather than sort of research grant folks. And we started doing the work that would eventually turn into OpenMind, into Luminoso a really long time ago, back when search was getting started and Google was getting started. And we're like, oh, we're going to revolutionize search. And that didn't happen. And so I guess we took a really long time and we started saying, oh, we've collected all this information. We've collected these ways of reasoning about language. And we'd have these weeks where people would come in to the Media Lab, and Media Lab people all remember this, and the companies would come and they'd come around, and it was like a little science fair, and you'd present what you did. And everyone would be like, this is great. When are you starting a company so we can use this commercially? And after about several of these sponsor weeks like this, we're like, okay, we're going to do it. In fact, my student was the one who was going to do it. And he was doing his PhD, and he was actually ABD at the time, and he walked in, and he basically sat down and said, I'm going to go start a company, and there's nothing you could do about it. And I was like, oh, okay. So we got started.
So if you can't beat them, join them.
Exactly.
All right, so tell us a little bit about the innovation, the real concepts behind Luminoso. Is this something that comes because we have better techniques, because we came up with a better algorithm, because you have access to a better data set?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think data is really important for AI, and especially for natural language processing. Sort of the innovation behind what we do is we're what's called a transfer learning company. And everybody this morning has talked so much about data, right? And that you need to have a lot of data, you need to have good data. There's another part of machine learning that's happening right now called transfer learning that says, look, it's going to be really hard for you to get the amount of data you need to train something like Word2Vec or Glove or any of these language processing models for, say, Comcast or Fidelity or any of these places. So what you need to do is you need to understand the world really well, and you need to be able to take a couple of data points and move a general understanding into a specific place. And so I think that was really sort of the innovation. And when we started at MIT, when we had GPUs, it was great, but it wasn't very common. So we started having to really look at different ways of scaling the kind of machine learning we were doing, especially in the early days of sort of embeddings and deep learning. And I think it became really clear that when we worked under constraints, we were going to have to be able to bring this to enterprise, which has similar constraints than we did when we started out.
Yeah, and that sort of begs the question, because the technology you've built is really powerful, but it's also very general.
Yeah.
In thinking about building a business based on a technology, how do you balance building a horizontal platform versus specializing on certain use cases? Is this a horizontal, or is it a vertical value proposition to your customers?
When you're thinking about what we built and what our technology base was, it's extremely horizontal. In fact, that's one of its strengths. I mean, we do domain adaptation. We specialize to consumer financial services or to retail, and we do it really, really quickly, which means you end up with a product that can pretty much do anything in a lot of different domains. And that's actually not what you want to be doing when you're building a company. AI works best and AI succeeds in the enterprise best when it's solving a very practical, specific, business-driven problem for a set of people that's really well defined. And it can be really hard for a company to come out of research that has a really powerful platform to say, no, we're going to cut out 80% of what we do. We're going to focus on this tiny 20%. And we're also going to throw out some of the advantages of flexibility that we have and just basically focus on this one thing. And we could do, I don't know, energy companies. We could do all these things. And if they come to us, we will, but it's not what we focus outward on. And that really is important. And when I see people starting AI companies, and I see people going out there and trying to find AI companies to work with, a really good marker of success is, are they able to focus or not?
And so what are those killer apps, those key use cases for Luminoso?
For us, we really just ended up in customer feedback analysis and customer service. And I think one of the reasons there is because there's such a great need. I think people don't really realize this, but individuals, like everyone's reaching out to companies so much more than they used to, and the number of calls going into a contact center is going up. People have in-app ticketing. It's just everybody wants to talk to you right now. And we think nobody picks up the phone anymore, but people are picking up the phone now more than ever, and it's becoming a cost issue. And it's also becoming sort of a differentiator for companies that are good with their customer service versus not. So there's really a need there. And when we looked at everything, we said, okay, we're going to look at the way we can help these different markets. This is a place where we really want to focus.
And do your customers think of this as a way to reduce the cost of being in communication with their customers? Or do they think that, do they really drive value based, like, do they do anything when you tell them?
Yes.
I
hope so.
Your customers are complaining about this problem, or like, are they just trying to drive down the call center cost?
No, I mean, there's definitely people who need to drag down costs. There are definitely people who are like, oh God, if we don't do anything, we're going to have to open another call center by the end of the year, and then that's terrible, right? But there's also customer satisfaction, and as we walk into industries that are a lot more differentiated, people are really can place a value on almost the soft ROI of your NPS score, for people who know what that is, or your customer satisfaction.
How many people in the audience know what an NPS score is? All right, you go.
That's like
ask your neighbor.
Over half.
Yeah.
And things like that. And the other side is sort of churn and loyalty and conversion. And can we look at these really important KPIs and say, what can you be doing? What actions? What's the next best action you could take to sort of push these things forward?
Yeah. These business processes, they're pretty mission critical. I mean, if you blunder, or if you have a customer relations disaster, I won't name any airlines by name. So these are important. This is important for your customers. How do you win their trust as an enterprise customer, both as a startup who is new and unproven, but also especially when employing AI, which is as technology is new and unproven. Like how and especially over the years that you've been doing Luminoso, have you seen sort of market readiness for these kinds of technologies? How have you seen those evolve?
I think market readiness for AI is sort of the unspoken differentiator in a lot of ways. For us, we came out of the Media Lab. We were used to working with data. And when I was teaching at MIT, we sort of watched the corporate culture of data change over time. So in the beginning, people would give us data, give my group data, things that were just ridiculously frightening. When you think about it, it's like, how would you give them this data? And in time, people really became really worried about it. But one of the things you learn is that you need to have security, and you need to think about that stuff right off the bat. We're able to go into a data center or go on premise. And one of the reasons we were able to do that is because we started out with the knowledge that we were going to have to. One of my co-founders is a security guy, right? And that's something where you're like, at an AI company, you want to have somebody who has a background in cloud architecture and security. And it's important, right? Because if you're working with financial services companies, you need to be able to have that guarantee. And even when I'm working with smaller AI startups, you have this real fear that they're going to have to, you have this giant questionnaire, and it's an enormous amount of time that you go through, and they're asking you questions like, how big are the hedges on your data center? And you have to have good answers for that. And it's a real important thing, because I think a lot of AI companies don't think about, how are we going to pass this? How are we going to get through this?
Fascinating. And do you think that customers are more ready now than they were 2 years ago, 4 years ago?
And certainly in a lot of places, yes. I mean, we're seeing, I mentioned consumer financial services, we're seeing people like that try out the cloud. We do a lot of business in Asia, actually, because we work in Chinese and Japanese. And we're seeing people over there start thinking about the cloud in ways that it never would have happened several years ago. So I think it's not that people are more ready for AI, but people are more ready to try something new because you see the bigger companies doing it. You see companies like Salesforce, which are very cloud-driven, going into these big enterprises, and there's no flexibility they'd have to go use something else if they weren't using the cloud. So I think that people are definitely ready to try things and ready to understand that these providers are safe. We don't need to do something really extravagant.
That's great. One thing that is very much in the news right now is I feel like we've gone from AI being utter science fiction to being something that was kind of on the fringe of consciousness to something that was really hyped. And now we're starting to get that backlash wave of fear and uncertainty. And that takes a lot of forms. But one of them is this idea that that AI could on the one hand, there's kind of the optimistic take that AI is purely objective. If we have AI judges, they'll make perfectly fair sentences. If we have AI admission systems, they'll make perfectly objective decisions. And then there's this sort of countervailing, but wait, if we train an AI on data that reflects human bias, then now we've trained bias into the algorithm.
Right.
So how do you think our industry should respond to those concerns?
I mean, I think it's really important for people, especially in natural language processing, to build testing systems and to talk openly about it. And to really find ways to measure it. And there's a couple of really important examples to this. So we started learning about this problem pretty early on when we were working with doing, honestly, a sort of restaurant and hospitality use case where people noticed that right off the bat, certain types of restaurants had lower scores than other types of restaurants, and that wasn't something from the review. And you look back and you realize something, which is that all of these big NLP systems that are out there, the big open source systems, they're trained from what's on the web. And that's because they need so much data that that's the only place they're going to get it. And so they're picking up the biases that you find on the web. And Google has this thing where they came out with WordDevec, and a lot of people remember they came out with an analogy: man is to woman as king is to queen. If you do man is to woman as programmer is to, it'll tell you housemaker. The same system. And a lot of those biases, and there've been racial bias stuff with Glove, and a lot of that's built in. And I think companies now are starting to say, look, these are the things that are making decisions. We can't bring this kind of stuff that we're seeing in these tools into the decision-making process. When we look at our base model, we spend a lot of time trying to measure and pull that bias out, and we make those numbers available, and we think that's important. But what I would really love to see is sort of more companies think about that, right? It's only within the last 6 months that customers will say, what are you thinking about when you're thinking about bias? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, are your customers starting to ask for this?
Only just starting. And that's something that I think there needs to be a real understanding, because when you're thinking about even in a regulated industry, they have to do these things. Right? They have to do these things. It's so important. And when you're thinking about the big AI providers, they also have to start thinking about these. And I know everybody really wants to do it, but the bigger the company, sometimes it takes a while to get this kind of stuff going. And also, it's a data source issue, right? They read the web, you get the biases from the web.
Fascinating. All right, I have a lot more questions I could ask you, but I would like to give the audience a chance to jump in. I'm not 100% sure that this iPad is set to the right room. So if you have questions, why don't you raise your hands, and I think we have someone here who could run mics.
Hi. On the topic of bias, there's been some research in systematically removing bias, actually in this WordDevec space. Do you think that there's promise moving in that direction, or do you see this as something where you're going to want to bring in people, analyze the data, provide feedback, and then take an iterative process?
We're doing some work in-house. So Luminoso is also affiliated with something called ConceptNet, which is a large open, a bunch of people are nodding, which is a large open data set, large open embedding similar to WordDevec. And we've put a lot of work into pulling the bias out of that. And that's all done algorithmically and systematically. And it's about, hey, can we find this bias and can we just basically turn it off? right? And some of that work is, a lot of Microsoft is actually doing some really tremendous work in this area, where they're really looking at how can we find these kind of name-based biases, these other sorts of things, and sort of turn them on and off. And I think it's really important to do it in an automated way, right? Because it needs to be scalable, it needs to catch up with things that are happening on the web. Language morphs really quickly, and if people know that certain language is going to trigger something, they're going to develop other language to get around it. And so you have to have a system that can adapt equally fast.
More questions?
Hi, I'm Kanan from ServiceNow. So my question for you is around, you mentioned transfer learning.
Yeah.
And that brings up, I've not read your paper, so I apologize for that. I'm on, in spite of being an MIT alum. But I'm interested to know whether this transfer learning applies across languages, or what are you transferring? Maybe just that will be enough.
So what we do, there's a lot of ways of doing transfer learning, a lot of types of transfer learning. What we do, and actually very few of them are really in widespread commercial practice. We do two. So we do cross-lingual transfer as well. So we can look across languages. We work in 14 languages. We have models in 53 languages. So we can help understand that kind of stuff. But most of what we do is into domains. So if you think about it, every company out there, and sometimes even product lines within those companies, have a particular lingo that's really important. If you think about sticky is really good for software sales and really bad for lipstick. And transparency is really good for corporate governance and really bad for, say, clothing. Right, and being able to learn those things on the fly and understand that a carousel and a hamburger are part of a mobile interface, and they're very different for hospitality. That's what domain transfer is. And you think about that on the fun level, but domain transfer means a lot more when you're going into something like pharmaceuticals or financial services, where they have this or even consumer electronics, where they have this complicated lingo. So it's both.
Next question. Well, I'm curious because, as you say, transfer learning is so cutting edge. There are so few practitioners out there. And so I know that there are no silver bullets to hiring, that probably everybody here works for a company or a startup that wants to hire people who are experts in machine learning and AI, period. But transfer learning is so esoteric and narrow. How do you find the talent, and how do you persuade them to join? Yeah,
I think for us, we really have the sort of, we're connected to the community, right? And we come out there with ConceptNet, we go to ACL, we go to NIPS, we go to all these places. And so people know who we are, and when we're hiring in machine learning, that's not as much of a problem for us as, say, hiring front-end developers, hiring full-stack developers, things like that. And I think especially, we're in Boston, and our dev is all in Boston, and I think if you're looking at these big tech hubs, Boston, San Francisco, talent just gets so hard here, right? And it's not even just the really AI-heavy talent, but it's also developer talent, regular developer talent. And I think it's a matter of what you're doing is interesting, and if what you're doing is interesting and the people you're going to work with are great, then we think that's really how we can differentiate ourselves in that area. There's sadly, I really wish there was a silver bullet, and everybody always asks me this question, but there really isn't. You have to go out there, you have to be part of the local community of data scientists, go to the meetups, release pieces of software, be part of the community, and that's really, it's hard legwork, but that's really the only way to do it.
Now, when you're releasing pieces of software, are you open sourcing part of your platform?
Not really part of the platform. So Luminoso is as much of a spin out of an open data project called ConceptNet, or Open Mind Common Sense, as it is from MIT. And ConceptNet was born in the late 90s in the Media Lab. And it was, as I said, at the time, something to make search smarter. And eventually, we're eventually going to come back around and make search smarter again, but that's neither here nor there. It's just kind of one of those things with AI. And so what we do is we sort of release the domain general model, not the transfer learning algorithm or the domain models or any of that kind of stuff. But if you're thinking about it, WordDevec is out there, Glove is out there, Fast Text is out there. We'd release something like that that's more accurate, that's better on a lot of the evaluation benchmarks. And I think that's important, right? You're not, the kind of stuff we're doing, you're not going to do well with a domain general model It's just too specific. The customer language is too specific. But in the same time, it also allows us to, really be part of the community, keep pushing that back out.
And who do you find from the community is using that model? What kinds of problems are they solving with it? Is this purely researchers? Are there commercial users?
There are both. There are researchers and commercial users. We're old school open data, which means we actually don't track downloads. So we don't know everyone who's using it. Sometimes we run into folks. We have a community forum. We have a sort of Slack-type Discord chat that people talk to. So we do get in touch with the users on a daily basis who are using this stuff. And it's interesting. They're really all over. We have folks from the government trying to do something that I really don't even know what it is. And we have a lot of researchers, right? And we have a lot of people who are looking for something like that, who are looking for accurate embeddings to sort of start out as a framework.
And what are some of the most, with your commercial customers, what are some of the most interesting or intriguing use cases? Or maybe with AI, when it makes mistakes, it always makes interesting mistakes. So what have been some of the best mistakes that have led to innovation or improvements in the system?
Right. I would say most of the time, if it's making mistakes, it's not actually making mistakes out on the customer site. When we were building it, it made mistakes, which was funny. I think when it comes to, I think the best one was when at some point when we were developing negation, we were turning it on and off just to do something, and we had run a full run of the system with negation turned off. And it turns out that someone had told our base model that everything is either a bathtub or not a bathtub. And if you turn off negation, that means you build a world model. At the top of the world model above thing is bathtub. And that's really kind of quite funny. But I think when it comes down to it, really the good use cases are places. My favorite use story is actually we work with a company called Supercell, which you either know as a gaming company or you know because you play Clash of Clans and you didn't know that it had a name that wasn't Clash of Clans. A lot of people play Clash of Clans. It's interesting. People stream video games online, and a lot of other people watch now. And so one of the streamers for Clash of Clans was playing, and he had like a lot of people watching him, possibly a huge number of people watching him. And he said, if you call Supercell customer support and you say these 6 words, you will get free things. And so promptly, the multitudes of high school students who are watching this stream pick up their app and start, in-app ticketing to Supercell customer support with these 6 words. And so what ends up happening is we needed to see that coming in, and right off the bat, send all these people to it's the contact center word is diversion. So you send them to self-help and a nice little page that says, no, what are you doing? Right, and Supercell is sitting there up in Finland where they are, and they're watching their call center volume. And because we were able to adapt, their call center volume didn't change. So they didn't know this happened until they checked their other logs about a couple weeks later, honestly. And they saw that their input to our system had gone like this over this period of time. And they're like, what the heck happened? And it was like 6 weird words too. It wasn't even something particularly normal.
Oh, so it wasn't like, I'm quitting if you don't refund
right, no, that would have been smart, right? But it was, I don't remember
what it was. It was just like apple, tomato.
Right, exactly. And then you'll get a free legendary card. And it's like, just like, what is going on? No, these people don't get free legendary cards. No one gets a free legendary card. I think it's more on the user end that the stories are always kind of humorous. It's things users try to do.
I think we have time for one more question. Let's take it in this corner here, and then we can. The mic's coming to you.
Hi, my name's Dave Wang. I'm an undergrad alum from MIT. I had a question about, just based on your last example. So basically, the company didn't find out about this, this great thing you did until 2 weeks afterwards. So my question is, how do you, I guess it's a video game company, so they may be pretty savvy, but how do you show your value proposition? Because it wasn't like you solved the pain point, but you helped them avoid pain.
I think when it comes to cost, we can say this is how much we diverted. We diverted 40% more than you were diverting before in this case, right? And so that has a real ROI to it. And if you're keeping logs on your side, you know what that ROI is, and so you can talk about that. Besides, they see that kind of stuff, right? And by the time this happened, they had been working with us for a while, so they knew it. Which is probably why they weren't checking as often. But I think it's something where people really need to understand and prove that out and say, oh, hey, How is this changing my NPS? How is this changing my churn?
Well, Catherine, thank you so much. This has
All
been
right,
really
thank
illuminating
you.
and much appreciated. I'd like to welcome to the stage our next speaker, who is Hiltch. Yeah. Round of applause. Orr is the founder and CTO of Skyline AI. And Skyline is if I have this right, and I'm not dropping my mic on the floor, Skyline is a real estate investment technology platform which uses proprietary AI to outperform commercial real estate investment benchmarks. And Orr is a serial entrepreneur. His previous startup was sold 2 years ago, and Skyline is his second startup. Both of them have been backed by Sequoia. We may have some audience questions about how you manage that. But let's dive into kind of the origin story here of Skyline. You studied computer science, you worked in security, and then video optimization. How on earth did you get from there to real estate investing?
Yeah, sure, that's a good question. So first of all, I have to say that I'm probably the dumbest guy on this panel because I'm the only one who didn't study at MIT. So yeah, after selling our previous companies, myself and my co-founders found ourselves investing in real estate in the attempt to diversify our portfolio. And it wasn't too long before we realized that this industry, how much this industry relies on things like personal trust, gut instinct, and intuition to drive deals. And it wasn't too long before we noticed how backwards it was when it came to using technology. We went to talk with some of the largest private equities and real estate operators in the States, and we found out that Excel, like where you would probably imagine machine learning and AI being used, there's only Excel. And the funny story is that my brother, he's a dentist, and he builds flutes on his spare time, and he sells the flutes on Amazon. And as a seller on Amazon, he has access to advanced technology that the guys at the private equities doing real estate could only dream about. Now, you don't look scared enough. These are the guys that invest billions of dollars of our pensions in real estate. So given our backgrounds in AI and using it in order to solve interesting problems, we decided to tackle this industry together with Sequoia Capital.
So in what manner does artificial intelligence actually make better real estate investments than human beings? Like what's the headroom that humans were not getting where there's room for AI to do better?
Good. Yeah. So I think first of all, if you ask like a really good real estate expert to value a commercial property or to tell you if the deal is good or not, then they will not use a pen and paper. They will just they see the building and say, okay, this is a good deal because it feels right. In fact, if you tell them to calculate it, to use a pen and paper and tell you why this is a good deal, they will not be able to do it. And what we're basically trying to do is we're trying to solve feels right using AI. And the way it works is basically, so the good real estate guy from our story, he has seen dozens of properties during his career, and he has like 20 years of experience. And our AI has seen all properties. It has like 50 years of experience. It has about 10,000 features per property, and it never forgets anything. So ultimately, this AI is used to generate things like predictions about the rents, the sale price, if it's a deal, then what the IRR would be, and so forth. And this allows us to source and underwrite deals 10x faster and a lot better.
So if you're capable of making better real estate investment decisions, why sell that as a tool to other investors? Why not just raise a big hedge fund and just directly invest in real estate and make a killing that way? Actually, I ask entrepreneurs this question all the time.
Yeah, so we actually
and usually the answer comes down to because we don't know how to raise a hedge fund.
So we asked ourselves the exact same question, and we came to a conclusion that if indeed we believe that we have developed the real estate alpha, then if we sell it away, we just license it, then we would lose our alpha, right? So we came up with this hybrid business model where we actually do not license the technology. The way it works is that we actually invest our own money. So personally, the founders and a cadre of investors and family offices that are working with us. And we're using the technology, we're basically leasing the technology to local operators in the States. So for them, we basically, in order to get a share of the deal. So for a top operator that has a really good deal, we are not just a capital source, but also a valuable data technology that helps them evaluate and underwrite the deal a lot better.
And I'm curious because you talked about, the 50 years of data, the thousands of features, but, real estate markets are so regionalized. I'm curious about, one of my favorite topics is data network effects. And I'm curious about the network effects here and whether they're regionalized. For example, if you had a model trained on real estate data from Tel Aviv, would it be relevant to buying and trading in London or in Phoenix, Arizona?
So most definitely not. We are actually, so first of all, we're only focused on the US, so we don't do anything outside the US. But also inside the US, we have several models. So just take a random feature for elevation. So elevation as a feature would be very significant somewhere, but in San Francisco, it may create lots of noise, right? Because the effect of elevation here is completely different. So we do have different models, sometimes different ensembles for different investment criteria. The investment criteria may be a geo, but it also may be a range of prices. So for example, really expensive properties behave differently from average ones. So we do have different models trained for different criteria. However, an interesting thing that we did find out is that we kind of like, as a part of so some of our features are engineered from the data, and some of them are actually coming from clustering that we're doing. And we actually found out that using some clustering techniques, we were able to basically create virtual neighborhoods where you would actually locate an asset in Atlanta in the same cluster as an asset that's in Missouri. Because it turns out that if you apply certain mathematical operations on their data, they're actually really highly correlated, and you can use them as what we call comps in this industry.
And what does that mean for your? I find that's really a fascinating concept. I could certainly imagine saying, okay, there's some commercial real estate in Missouri, and there's some commercial real estate in Colorado, and maybe one's a dentist office and one's something else, but like they're going to perform similarly because these other traits, add up. And but how will that continue to be true? How can you predict that will be true in the future when they're located in different regions whose economies are going to move in different ways?
Yeah. So basically, for each and every, let's say that we want to predict things like a transaction price, or a sale price. So for each point in time of the transaction price for an asset in the data set, we have basically a vector of all the other properties that are true to the time of the transaction. For example, what was the interest rate back then? Was there a loan on the asset? What was the lot area, and so forth? So in order to keep those predictions correct for the future, what we have to do, and this is one of our biggest challenges, is try to predict each and every one of these features for every geo for the future. Now, we don't do this entirely on our own, because there are companies which are really great at forecasting interest rates. This is not our business. Sure. But we're definitely customers of such data sources.
And does that mean that you're focused on a few specific regions?
Yeah, I would say currently our focus is multifamily in the investment criteria, and it's pretty much all of the United States, excluding what's called tier 1 cities. Like we do not look at investments in San Francisco or New York, for example. Yep.
And what's the reason to stay away from tier 1 cities?
Mainly because what's going on there. It's pretty hectic when it comes to, for example, there is no normal distribution of asset prices and all sorts of crazy stuff that you do find in other places.
So in other words, the behavior of the human beings in these markets is so irrational that the AI can't reliably predict it.
Something like that.
So good for a chuckle, but actually I'm really interested in this, digging a little on this, because I'm very interested in what makes a problem a good problem for AI and what makes it a bad problem for AI. And so I'm curious, sort of, volatility here is high, but that doesn't make me automatically think that AI is a non-starter. I guess, can you say more about the characteristics of these markets that make them hard for AI to predict? Yeah.
So, for example, in New York, you would find a lot of times where you see several investors compete over an asset, and eventually the price is not what you would call the correct price. Sometimes it may be because there is a fund who is approaching its sunset and it has to invest the money, otherwise they would not be able to raise the next one. So there are all sorts of, this is one of the biggest challenges And this is actually one of where a lot of our work is done, is trying to build the data set that would, make this industry a bit closer to the perfect market we see in the stock market. Because now it's really not the case, right? Now it's really, there's a lot of like under the hood stuff, decisions which are taking like under the radar.
Do you think is this just a limitation of the data? Like if you could fully model the investment firms
certain.
as well as the properties, like could you
Definitely.
more completely and accurately predict this?
Yeah, I'm pretty certain about that. Yeah.
Is that something you plan to do someday, or?
So, we have begun working in this direction. So, for example, some of our data comes from business partnerships. So we actually partner with several large real estate institutions in the States where we basically give them access to our technology in exchange for Excel sheets. It's kind of funny because they have like this gold mine of underwriting that they did in the past, which just sits there like on their storage, and we are able to get really private and interesting insights from that. So yeah, we have been doing that.
Fascinating. And when you think of expansion, where do you feel like growth comes from here? Is it from expanding into more regions? Is it expanding to more property types? Is it making the model more accurate and squeezing more margin?
Yeah, so it's all of that, but I would say that right now our main focus when it comes to expansion is about the sourcing, because you only want to source good deals, so you need to have good underwriting before you go to sourcing. But once you nail underwriting, then this is time to use this in order to...
And by sourcing, do you mean like discover properties
that
might be
yeah.
for sale, or
so
that you could approach with an
exactly,
offer?
like identify zip codes which have like, a lot better potential than other ones.
And that's fascinating to me. I feel like there's so many problems. We fasten on like getting the right price, but it turns out the hard problem is actually sourcing.
Yeah.
I think that's sometimes true in startup investing too. And so, how do you improve sourcing? Like, what features do you add to the model? What engineering do you do? Is that an algorithmic improvement? Is it just about more volume of data?
Yeah. So what we do, we call it, for example, in the sourcing algorithm, one of the things that we develop, we like to call it like soon-to market detection. We basically try to look at an area where basically assets are starting to be exited. And it could be for various reasons. It could be for, maybe there's a typecast of the owner that likes to sell at a certain criteria. Maybe it's a collection of funds which are forced to sell because all sorts of reasons. And then we try to pick out, to basically identify the next one to be likely to sell. And we actually had a case where we kind of like approached an owner and asked them, and we kind of like identified that he's going to sell before he actually knew he was going to sell, right? Because he doesn't really know what happens around the city. He knows, okay, at some point he will start understanding that this is probably a good time for him to sell, but sometimes our technology can identify this before he does. So.
That's great. I want to ask every one of you a question about the ethics around data and around our industry. And when it comes to real estate, I think there's a bunch of real questions, at least here in the United States. We have a long history of, you described irrational decisions being made about buying and selling real estate that are just about, funds being at the end of their cycle. But this country has a history of irrational real estate decisions being made to concentrate economic power with one another or another economic group, or to discriminate, or to de facto create segregation. Given that history of housing discrimination, how do you come up with an objective measure of value for real estate when your data set has this kind of tainted history in it?
Yeah. So I think there are two main points around that. First, I have to disclaimer that I would not venture into guessing, what was the motives behind economic diversification decisions in a country that I did not grow up in. But that being said, I do believe that data used with good intentions and wisely could open up the market to segments of the population that were otherwise abandoned. So the stock market is a good example, right? Because you see like apps like Robinhood that basically offer trading with no fees, and suddenly you have like a whole bunch of people trading because they were not doing this earlier because
You've
of the fees.
democratized access.
Yeah, exactly. Now, commercial real estate is definitely not the stock market, But there, I could tell you that, it's interestingly enough, a lot of the interesting investments that Skyline is looking at are exactly at those areas. And we believe that, investments in those areas being made will make more investments happen and ultimately bring growth and prosperity to those areas.
Oh, as long as you're reading up on gentrification while you're working on that, I'll leave you with that challenge. How about some questions from the audience? Right here. We'll get you next.
Hi, you mentioned leasing the technology. Can you expand on that a little bit and how that essentially scales your business model?
Sure. So we're a startup, right? We only established about a year ago. So while we do have a lot of track record in building startups and we do have a super experienced real estate team, you would not expect us to get to the places where we have gone to. So today, because of the technology, because we allow a select group of operators and private equities with access to this technology, we are able to co-invest with them on like super high-grade institutional deals that usually only large banks or really big family offices would have access to. So this is probably our biggest leverage of the technology, basically leasing it in that way in order to get access to good deals for our investors.
And I think we had one more over here.
So this topic is very interesting to me because my wife is a real estate agent, and sometimes I'm the data guy to influence the client to overbid $300,000 to $400,000 of when the price is $1 million, right? And one thing I learned, certain aspect has higher correlation to price than others. For example, I find it surprising that how high are you in the building is higher correlation to the price than actual time when was sold. Okay. Now my question, I guess, because I'm kind of exploring investment on the multiplex, what are the top 3 factors that have higher correlation to the price? I know maybe this is the secret sauce here, but it's kind of
Yeah.
Sorry, he has thousands of features. He can give you a couple.
Yeah. So maybe some of the less obvious ones. So we mentioned elevation. Elevation is significant. Walk score. So in places like New York City or San Francisco, everything is super walkable. You can walk everywhere. But if you live, I don't know, in Queen Creek, Arizona, you need to be able to walk. Being able to walk to places is very significant. A lot of the very interesting features are actually engineered. So for example, I don't know, instead of using the lot area, you would use something like, the number of units and like divided by each of their own area, or so all sorts of stuff that eventually turns out to be more significant than what you would initially think they are. But the list is very, very long. There are lots of features, lots of interactions because, everything from the interest, so the US bonds maturity rate, it's also a very important feature because it's kind of like in the commercial real estate industry or in the investments industry in general, it's an alternative investment route, right? You can buy bonds or you can invest in real estate. So when this one is high, this one is low. Yeah.
Saw another hand back here.
Sure.
Hi, how's it going? I was just interested in, like, as far as performance and benchmarking your performance and, like, just some of the statistic that you would have to say that, because you hear a lot of people saying, oh, we use AI for investing in stocks, AI investing in real estate. So do you have, like, some numbers as far as, like, when we use AI for this, we saw 30% increase in revenues. When we didn't, we saw such and such.
Yeah. Good. Yeah, so first of all, there is the standard industry benchmarks where you try to see, for example, if this is the rent, and I try to predict the rent, and this is my model, what is my RMSE? So now for things where we have tons and tons of data, for example, rent is one of them, because rent is like a time series, you have like each and every month you have a rent figure, and for each and every rent figure you have a huge vector of features, so you end up with really like petabyte scale data, okay? So it's really lots of data. And there you can reach an accuracy of about, we currently reach an accuracy of about 95% when trying to predict future rents. On other things like transactions, it's a bit lower because it's a bit more scarce. But what we usually do, so when we start a new cooperation, so for example, now we met this new private equity we want to work with, usually the first thing that they would do is they would send us like 5 deals like that they know about, and then they would ask us to send them back an analysis report showing what we think about those deals, like in the past from data that only they have supposedly, and also what we think is going to happen in the future. And usually we are able to nail it pretty good, and then this is like the beginning of the cooperation. So this is how we kind of benchmark ourselves in that respect.
I think we're out of time here, but let me ask you one last lightning question, and you could just give me a sort of yes, no, or a time scale. Do you think real estate investing will ever be fully automated, and in what time frame?
So the question is yes, but I think it will take a long time. You know, I think it was Niels Bohr who said making predictions is hard, especially about the future. I don't think so. Nowadays we're able to underwrite and source 10x faster and better. But you know, the commercial real estate market is still not fully transparent, and will take a long while until it will get there. And only when this happens, we will be able to make it 100% robotic, or maybe 70% like the stock market today. I think it will happen in like maybe 5 or 10 years from now, because initiatives like We Live or the autonomous vehicle, these will probably go hand in hand with a lot more data transparency. Because these are kind of like new age companies of real estate. They know, they value data, they speak the language. So I do see this happening, but not in the near future. Yeah.
So we need more AI native startups.
Yes.
All you entrepreneurs in the room, get to work. Thank you so much, Or.
Cheers. Thank you.
My pleasure to summon our third entrepreneur to the stage. Nancy Hua, the CEO and founder of Apptimize.
Thanks,
Welcome,
Jocelyn.
Nancy.
Thanks, Jocelyn. Hello.
So Apptimize is an optimization platform for native mobile apps that offers feature flagging, A/B testing, analytics, all those other features that we just could not live without. And she's also an MIT alum who studied math and computer science.
Yeah.
So excited to have you here, Nancy. You actually started your career in finance. So
yeah.
what was the inspiration for Apptimize? Like, what made you switch gears and become a tech entrepreneur?
Whenever people ask me this question, it's always like similar to asking about the meaning of life, how you ever make these decisions. Well, I started my career after MIT in high-frequency trading. So all of the trades that we did were automated, and I worked at a company called Gecko, which at the time was dominant in high-frequency trading. So I was, in a lot of cases, like a majority of the volume on the cash bonds and futures exchanges, and you know, it was really fun. I think after a while, I started to feel like I wanted to be able to share some of the stuff that I was inventing, or just, I don't know, invent something that could be more publicly used. Because at Gecko, we traded our own money, and we never had customers or anything like that, and it was very much about winning and making more money. I mean, that's the purpose of finance, right? It's like make more money. But after a while, you start to want to know more about what you can contribute to the world. And at MIT, you really elevate like the scientists and people that you know, contribute things to the rest of humanity that we can never repay. There's no amount of money that it's worth to like, you know, pay back the people who invented the light bulb and so forth. And that kind of engineering really inspired me. So when I first moved to Silicon Valley from New York, it was to start the company with my co-founder, Jeremy. And we had a few different projects that we were working on, but they were all analytics and mobile related, because I felt like those were the spaces that were most interesting to us. And I don't know if you remember, but the way we met was after Y Combinator, Mark Zuckerberg introduced you to me and to teach us about, and at the time I knew very little about this, because even though what we started with our company was A/B testing and analytics related, it's not what I would have, like A/B testing is not how I would have talked about my work in trading, even though that is what we were doing to generate the models and the algorithms.
Experimentation.
Yeah, exactly. But we didn't have the language at the time to talk about it. So I think there's this huge trend with Zetta has been like always at the forefront of, I think, in terms of understanding like how data is driving all of this stuff, and then AI as a result of it and all this. But I remember talking with you, and you were like, I think you like laid out the groundwork that was really inspiring for us to see like this is how Facebook operates. This is how their teams are able to leverage like hundreds of engineers to make this platform and iterate multiple times a day. And that's how we saw that like every company had to be able to do that one day in order to operate. So now we're installed in probably on a lot of your devices today. We're installed in a lot of major apps, and especially like top apps in the world like Viber, who are like default installed on a lot of Android devices and in every sector. So I think it's all about being able to let other people have leverage and do things that are actually really complicated and technical, but not require them to like know every single thing about the universe. So in a lot of cases, our business users are able to do things that are engineering and are very technical ideas, but they don't need to know everything about like all of the math that goes into it.
Well, those were good days. But I do, as Nancy mentioned, I have a past life before I became an investor. My previous job, I was working at Facebook, and one of the things I did there was run the mobile engineering team and help the company with the pivot to mobile. And I have a lot of battle scars from those days.
I remember you talking about
because,
that.
this spirit of experimentation and kind of incremental testing and change, like make a change, push it, test it, make a change, push it, test it. That culture at Facebook, and I'll call it a culture, it wasn't just a software development release process, was born on the web. It was born for the LAMP stack. It was born when we could push the site twice a day because it was just servers under our control. And one of the things that was very difficult for Facebook about switching to mobile was you can't make a change twice a day. So if you make a change, test it, make another change, test it, make another change, test it, all of a sudden if those cycles are 4 or 8 weeks apart, like your software delivery sort of falls to pieces. And so given that what Apptimize does is enable mobile app companies to bring the spirit of kind of experimentation and sort of incremental delivery, continuous delivery to mobile, how do you do that? What's the right balance of constant change with sort of periodic releases? Is there like one best release cycle for mobile? Like what is the spread you see among your customers? You have the bird's eye view.
Yeah, so it generally converges on 2 weeks. That's usually where people are at now. It's compressed a lot since we started the company. When we first started.
So for once there is one right true answer.
Well, I can explain
2 weeks.
more.
Remember that.
I can get more into nuance, but like when we started the company, it was like everyone was doing a release like once a quarter or something, like very infrequently. Now it's accelerated to around 2 weeks. In some ways, I think people are reluctant to push faster than that because there's the danger of just over-indexing on certain things and like not having enough data or waiting long enough to make sure that you got a stable result. It'll depend a little on the type of app it is. So like Starbucks, one of our customers, they can actually release less frequently in some cases because they like want to account for seasonality and other like coupons and promotions that they're running, but they aren't like doing a new thing every day that they think is going to potentially reflect stuff. So they're okay releasing a little slower. A lot of other people are trying to accelerate to like once a day or something like that if they're like trying to really catch all of the edge and like increase the conversions as fast as possible and all of the new things they're doing constantly.
And how about, because we're here to talk about AI in particular, what about apps that are powered by a model, that are powered by intelligence, and that means they need to be collecting data and updating their model? Like, do you see a difference in that type of an application about kind of not just ideal release speed, but sort of what is the right mix of experimentation? What is the right mix of trying new things versus stability?
Yeah, stability is one of the key things. I think when people are using Apptimize to build their models, they care about stability, so they, in a lot of cases, need to slow down because it's really easy for them to just have an algorithm that is really like locally optimal, but not actually performing very well. And then they also want us to build help them build the targets for the people that they want to optimize various aspects of their algorithms for. I think like building that target profile can take time because usually you start with your hypotheses around like, oh, it's like the new versus return users or like very brusque segments that are kind of coarse, but then over time you actually become pretty nuanced about the value that the user is generating from the app, and they're like in some cases like have features that are pretty atypical or like just a little surprising. So you want to take time to build up that target correctly, and then a lot of it is around like optimizing the algorithms against each other so that you always have comparison between the different algorithms you're trying. And the thing that is, they usually have a baseline that is just like the human guess of what they would be doing or whatever they would have been doing by default. So it can take time. A lot of the pitfalls that we see people like very deliberately try to move away from is just not really understanding what's going on and just kind of blindly following whatever seems to be increasing conversions at that second. That's not really a sustainable way to build their business because they need to have actual product insight and have like the main sustainable competitive advantage that the customers have with their users is like knowledge around what the users want, a trust relationship with the users so that they like know that you're going to continue delivering new features to them or new content or whatever that is actually what they care about. And to do that, you have to have like a pretty qualitative, human readable insight on like this is what they were trying to do and this is like my theory for the future. And when we've seen people kind of just randomly make changes and I mean, you kind of start that level at like more random stuff, but like they want to build up to the level of probably where Facebook was at, where you understand all this stuff about your users that you wouldn't know otherwise, and you have a deeper relationship with the changes. So it's not just like A versus B or whatever, but it's like deeper signals where you're like, this is how I identify, this is the intention of the user at this moment.
You don't want to become sort of the human version of a greedy algorithm where you just chase a metric until it plateaus and then you're stuck.
Yeah, or just like a person that tunes algorithms all day. Like, you want to like have insights into how you're going to build a better model.
So how does Apptimize help your customers? I mean, you give them an experimentation platform, but
right.
How do you give them that qualitative sense of insight? If that's what you believe is crucial for them to succeed.
We make sure that they have a lot of rigor around their testing plans, so that they have hypotheses set up in the beginning. I think that's the key in the beginning because you can also always after the fact be like, oh, well, I thought it was going to be like this. And it's like you're very revisionist around thinking that you would have predicted a particular thing. You really have to record it in advance. And then I think like we do talk a little about when we do panel analysis of data that people are willing to share because we are in apps in every vertical. So then we'll talk about other things that people are trying. And it's interesting because it's not as much apps in the same like category in the App Store that have as much commonality in a lot of cases, but more like how your business model works. So we'll try to make recommendations there on what we see is happening that's important and how they're starting to target their users better.
That's really interesting. What are some of the other big challenges for applications that are based on AI? Like they've got to understand their user, is it data collection? Is it, are there structural problems? Like, what commonalities do you see among, sorry, that's another question.
I don't know if it's the AI stuff I think it's still just a challenge. There's like all these technical barriers to just shipping the feature that you wanted to make. And I don't know, people are still like behind on all those areas. That's the main complaint that I hear whenever we do the surveys on what the customers are struggling with. It's like, hiring more engineers and like doing more stuff. Because they have a lot of ideas. Like our customers they're very insightful. They have a lot of data, and they have a lot of stuff that they know they just need to do to make their app better, or any of their digital properties better, but they're always behind. So I think that's how continuous delivery and everything fits in too, so that it's like an integral part of an experimentation platform, where if you don't have a framework for being able to constantly deploy and iterate and push new changes, in a lot of cases, like very regularly, even if the other changes aren't ready, or even if like you hadn't totally hardened your app and like QA'd every instance, you still need to deploy very regularly in a disciplined way, because otherwise you just always feel like you're behind and you never can get ahead to do the thing that is like a deeper learning, and you're always just kind of like, I have to push this fix or something like that.
Yeah, I think it's impossible to achieve the ideal of the train release model without feature flagging, without the ability to turn things off. But there is a dark side, I should say. Like, I mean, to trying to ship in this way, and that is that if you have this kind of spirit of constant experimentation, and you're always trying 3 different versions of the hypothesis, and then you branch out from there, and like based on those results you have 3 other versions, like, one of the ugly, side effects of that is you end up with a lot of dead code. And on the web that doesn't matter so much because the footprint of your code base is whatever, it's a blink on your data center. But when you're pushing a lot of dead code to sit on somebody's iPad or mobile phone, that becomes a problem for cleanup.
Yeah.
Do you help your customers with that? Do you have best practices that they ought to,
Yeah, definitely. So it's like on the adoption curve, usually when the customers first come to us, they aren't testing, they're not doing any feature flagging, they're not like doing anything. It's all like it's just the immaculate conception vision of some guy, and like they're doing it. But as they mature, it becomes a kind of a cool problem that now they have so many experiments and so many things that they're learning about. They have to
Now my code has a half-life longer than a week because people are really using it.
Yeah, people have different ways of addressing it. One interesting way is one of our customers, Strava, like has this team. I don't know. I wonder how you guys did it at Facebook actually. This whole time I was like, I should interview you about this more. But at Strava, they had set up this team. I forget what it's called. Something like risk awareness team, where they set up a few principles where they lowered the bar for the quality of the code that had to be written for our tests because they were like, this is going to help us test more effectively and not like over invest in something that we're not sure is going to work anyway. Because they have a lot of new things that they try, like everything from pricing to like onboarding to the categories of the users, to categories of the features that they want to put in the different packages and like social stuff, like everything. So they lowered the bar on that and have more redundant code, and then which normally they wouldn't tolerate as much. And then they also enabled the different teams to have some kind of risk budget where it's a cross-functional team where they all say like, okay, you can tolerate like this number of crashes or something from like this types of experiments that you're running, so that then they would be able to have this budget for having more things, like the trade-off between learning and like really baking in the thing that you're trying to learn off of, so that then they can like rapidly remove that code if it's looking like they're learning that it's not going to be as effective as they want it to be worth to actually build it out in a quality way. And then they very rigorously go back in and call the code. But they're a really like high performance engineering team. A lot of the other customers are just every once in a while they'll do like, whenever they're in an opportunity to do a redesign, that's when they kind of like go back and take out a lot of stuff. Yeah.
Well, I'd love to give the audience a chance to ask a few questions, especially if we have any mobile app developers out there. Yeah, right here. He's coming with the mic.
How do you think about the interaction of a lot of simultaneous tests that you could be running? So like at Facebook, you'd set up GKs and a bunch of stuff to coordinate sets of features. I'd imagine that less sophisticated clients still have an interest in examining some of those interactions that can actually play out in like somewhat unintuitive ways. Is that a thing you guys do or you see clients doing?
Yeah, in a lot of cases, if they don't basically have a data science team in-house that's sophisticated enough to think about this, or in a lot of cases they don't have data scientists, our customer success team will kind of just do it for them. Where in the beginning we'll make a test roadmap together, and then we'll say like, these tests have to be exclusive, these don't matter as much because they're like totally different parts of the app, or like whatever, so then you like qualitatively do it together. But you're right, there's a lot of stuff you kind of need to do if you have experience testing that you need to incorporate into that plan to make sure that it doesn't get polluted.
Right here. Let's go.
So do you also manage the metrics that all your clients track, or each client manage their own metric per experimentation and stuff?
We're also an analytics framework, so they see all their metrics inside of our platform, and we automatically import any metric that they're tracking with a third party. Like we have integrations with Localytics, Google Analytics, Omniture, I don't know, all of them. So they'll see all that data in our platform, but they also, we have an API where they can put it into their own framework. More people are building in-house analytics frameworks as they become more advanced, so then often they'll just like use our API to show it in their own place. In that case, it becomes harder for us to help with the customer success aspect of giving advice on whatever is showing a good return and stuff like that, and making sure that they're tracking the right things. But in that case, they'll usually have a data science team inside where they just do that on their own, don't really require as much attention, or they'll still, during a review, we have like very regular reviews with them, they'll show us their data so that we can give highlights on what we're noticing.
Well, I want to make sure that I get in my usual question about ethics. So since we've been talking so much about Facebook, Facebook's obviously in the headlines right now, not for a good reason, but because of how it handles user data. And I'm curious, because you see across, again, you're in the bird's eye seat, you see across all these startups and how all of them are handling user data. As an industry, how do you think we should be thinking about our responsibility and almost our stewardship of the data we're collecting?
Yeah, it's a tough question. I think there's very little knowledge around it, so it's hard to figure out what to do right now. I think that there will always be security violations of it. So it's like going to be a cycle where there'll be some security issue, and then we'll like come back and know how to fight that, and then it'll be more secure. I think people are really unclear on the impact of all the data that's coming out. So in a lot of cases, it's probably better safe than sorry. I think that right now, our policy around it is communication. So if you're effective in communicating the intention and the effect of what's going on with your users, then they're happy. So if you are like sincerely trying to communicate with them, then they understand more the trade-offs of what's going on. But luckily, our business model doesn't have to do with like selling the data or anything like that. So instead, I think that like allows us to sidestep a lot of the issues at Facebook.
Neither does Facebook's.
Like, yeah.
We don't sell your data. Not Facebook anymore, but they don't sell your data. I'm curious whether your customers are whether they are going to be affected by GDPR, whether they are
definitely
scrambling, is the hair on fire, are they feeling, no, we've got a handle on this, like how is that going to affect are they coming to you and saying, hey, Apptimize needs to help us with this because we're collecting data via Apptimize?
Yeah, definitely. I think in a lot of cases, our customers don't have a lot of experience dealing with this before, because I mean, like,
does everybody know what GDPR is? Sorry, should I?
Yeah, data
Have you heard of
protection.
GDPR? Raise your hand. That's almost half the room. General Data Protection Regulations?
Yeah.
It's the R. This is the new European regulatory framework that is coming into place that says people have a right to be forgotten, that people have a right to know exactly what data a company is collecting on them, and that if they ask the company to delete it, they have to delete it. This is, if you work at technology companies and you handle any user data, you know exactly how bewilderingly difficult that is to comply with. It's easy for a regulator to say, well, just delete all my data, and it's very hard in the ways that it's strewn through our distributed systems to actually even discover what we have, let alone to figure out if it's sensitive and to figure out if we've deleted it all. But it seems like that's
yeah. It's a huge issue. I mean, I think like a lot of our customers, especially if if their core business is selling coffee or selling shoes or whatever, they're not accustomed to thinking about this at all. So we help them think through a lot of it and make sure that we handle the data correctly. I think luckily, the background of me and the founding team was we were always very paranoid and secretive. Like, I don't know, in HFT when I worked there, like I didn't have any internet presence. Yeah, I was just very paranoid about my data. I think a lot of engineers kind of have this bias where you're like, I don't want anyone to know anything. So we architected our system to be really conservative on that end. And it didn't seem like anyone cared about this until the GDPR stuff, and now it's been an advantage where we won some of the deals, especially in Europe, like ITV, because all these laws are obviously still going to change. Like, they're just still forming and evolving. So a lot of our customers chose us because they want to go with a provider that they're trusting to partner with long term and who can adapt to all the stuff that's going to happen. And I think like it's going to be exciting. I think like the more flexibility you have over data management and the more you've thought about that as you architected your system, the more able you will be to like comply with everything. And also, hopefully, we can push the boundaries of what the standard is for being compliant for this type of thing. They're still deciding what all the laws are, but I mean, I don't know. It's just getting so much press right now. Like, the team is kind of excited because we get all these like letters from senators and so forth, and just like no one was ever interested in Apptimize before this, but now it's like, whoa, normal publications are suddenly interested in this. They don't really understand what they're talking about yet, but it's still like interesting.
Oh, good. Oh, good. We're at that part of the website.
Yeah.
All right. I think we might have time for one or two more audience questions. Right here. Do we have our mic? Oh, he's coming.
Thank you. We did talk about GDPR just now, and we know that data governance is important, but the people who are making these rules, how much do they know about the technology? We need to have data-savvy people out there to cross-question the smartest people on the planet, because I think a lot of smart minds are behind these technologies. They're architecting these algorithms, and they're telling us how to live. They're showing us the ads. They're sharing news with us. They're biasing our opinions, our elections, and we really don't have the smartest people there.
It's getting there. I've actually been pretty impressed. Like, I think, so when I was in HFT in 08 and 09, like I was constantly, interacting with SEC people. I think the compliance people have really upped their game. Like, at the time, like understanding of finance, which I think is a much bigger deal, honestly, like, was really shockingly low. Like, they would ask me really confused questions and be just, I don't know. I view it as kind of like a misalignment of incentives problem, where in finance especially, if you're good at it and you understand stuff, you like don't go into compliance, you go into the other stuff. But that's changed, and now I think compliance people are getting paid a lot more, and the people I've interacted with around the GDPR stuff they're still not like, the experts at everything yet, but I don't think anyone really is yet. And they are investing a ton more money into that type of thing. And just generally, I've been more impressed in how people are taking it more seriously. I think that it's still going to take some time. And like I said, it's going to be like a cycle where we're going to have these random violations and like everything will seem horrible, but then like we'll like recover and be better. And then net it'll trend up. But like if you just look at the window of the last year or something, you'll always be depressed. So I think that's how it'll be for a little while. And now it's, I think we have a lot of technical solutions to those things. I don't know if it's just like my bias from MIT, but I always view everything as a technical problem. So, Arab-Israeli conflict is a technical problem. All this stuff is a technical problem. So I think there's a lot of languages around privacy, like computational languages. There's a lot of stuff that we're inventing in terms of encryption and like data analysis on data that we want to keep private. I think all of this will eventually solve everything. So I have a lot of optimism around like how much engineering will solve it, and then also I think the compliance people will just kind of be there to steward the guidelines of what's going on.
The techno-utopian case for the future's brightness. But I do believe, actually, I'll kick it in a word. I think it is a responsibility of higher education, of the education system, period, to educate people who are very well-rounded and to make sure that even people who maybe are studying the social sciences want to go into a life of policy, of law, that they are informed by knowledge of technology, that we don't neglect that side of their education. And likewise, that people like Nancy who are going to go into technology and solve and find algorithmic solutions to these problems, that they are well informed by the humanities and the social sciences, so that we are bringing this ethics lens to the work that we do. And I think that's one place in which MIT serves its students and its alums very well, and I think we could hope that will spread broadly to other institutions. All right, Nancy, thank you so much for joining us. This was phenomenal.
Thanks, Jocelyn.
Welcome. Todd is the CEO and founder of MapD. And some of you may be users of MapD, but MapD is the world's fastest big data and analytics platform. It leverages GPUs to perform queries and visualize their results. And this came out of research Todd invented while studying at Harvard and further developed at MIT's CSAIL lab. Welcome, Todd.
Yeah, thank you so much.
So you have a little bit of an unusual background for a technology entrepreneur. You were not a computer science major. What were you studying in undergrad?
Anything and everything. So I was anthropology and econ undergrad, and then I was at Harvard doing Middle Eastern studies.
And how did Middle Eastern studies take you to the technology that became MapD?
Yeah, it was a bit of a long and winding road, actually. So I was doing my degree, and I lived in the Middle East for some years, and was very interested in the Arab Spring, and I was very interested in quantitative social science, right? So a lot of people do ethnographies. There's a lot of great qualitative social science out there. But I said, hey, look, for the first time, we're awash in all this data that can give us a new lens to actually understand what's kind of happening on the ground. As long as it's guided by, I think if you just go straight to the data without any actual sense of what's happening, that can be problematic. But based on my experience, I said, hey, let's take Twitter, for example. So Twitter was just getting really big at the time. And in the Arab Spring, if you remember, back in, say, 2011, everybody was using it to organize protests and like tweet their political opinions across Tunisia, Egypt, and other Arab countries. And so basically I started harvesting hundreds of millions of tweets. I was not totally, I had some computer science background. I had taken classes before. I had gotten so depressed about the state of the region while at Harvard that I started using all my electives to take like a machine learning course. I took a graphics on GPU course. And then finally, I actually cross-enrolled in the database course under Mike Stonebreaker and Sam Madden at MIT, my final semester. And so this was a great excuse to actually use all these skills and start doing analytics on all this data. And what I found was I was incredibly stymied by kind of the lack of interactivity or lack of speed of the platforms at my disposal. So I didn't have a large cluster, right? I didn't have a big Hadoop cluster or anything, or a Spark cluster at the time. I had a workstation under my desk. I had bought a GPU to play video games. And I said, hey, I think that GPUs can accelerate things like data analytics. We can take something like Vertica or Tableau, but we can make it 100x faster by leveraging the massive parallelism of graphics cards or GPUs. And so that's how it all started. And I did this final project for the MIT course under Mike and Sam. And it was very rudimentary, but it was 100x faster. They really liked it, and they said, this is pretty cool. You should come here to the database group at MIT CSAIL and kind of further your work on it, which I did.
And at what point did you have the thought, same question I asked Catherine, this is not just a research project, this could be a company?
Yeah, it was interesting. So I think, I always thought that it would be useful to a broader audience, but it wasn't really until I was at MIT and they had this industrial liaison program. And so because MapD, which originally stood for Massively Parallel Database, not something geospatial, because it had a heavy visual element. So the idea was to use these GPUs not just for querying the data very fast, doing very fast SQL queries, but actually using the rendering engine, the native graphics pipeline in these GPUs to render the data in situ, so rendering billions of points interactively in real time in a way that a database or a BI platform, a CPU-based platform could never do. And so they trot me up there and I would give this spiel about MapD, about my research. And actually all these companies were like, wow, man, we would kill to have something like this. And like big like social media companies and we wish we had this kind of speed. And so that's when I started getting the idea that this was back in 2013, that this could actually be something like a transformational business or a transformational kind of enterprise analytics platform. And eventually just took the leap and did it.
So who were your first few customers?
Yeah, so one was one of the, I don't think I can name them, but one of the
You don't need to name them, but by type.
social media analytics platforms. And then, yeah, we found like we had a big win in telco, right? So telcos, in some ways they're a little bit legacy, right? They don't necessarily like new technology, but they have such a major pain point and they have all this log data, not just call data records, but also all their server logs, all their data looking at churn of customers. And we found like we had a really unique value proposition there because we could actually give interactive results. So I remember, Verizon, one of our first customers, basically said, hey, like we were using a legacy analytics platform from a company that starts with O. And could be anything. And basically the queries, and this was an analytics, this wasn't just the normal transactional database. These queries over tens of billions of records would take 4 hours. And so when there would be a network outage or like call failures or something, they basically had no visibility into what was happening. And so with MapD, all of a sudden with sub-second, they could slice and dice it, figure out whether it was a firmware update on a handset, whether it was a bad cell tower, and it gave sight where there was none. I mean, I don't mean to make it sound more than it was, but it was pretty transformational for them. And so that was a major. We have five or so telco customers, ad analytics. We do a lot of like telematics data, kind of across the spectrum, and then federal government as well is a big growing business for us.
So I'm curious because when you got started, these were early adopters. I mean, AI was present, big companies like Netflix and Facebook were using it, but it was still kind of cutting edge.
Yeah.
There were still like a few people, like if you were a telco and old fashioned, like this was kind of like you were tiptoeing into kind of brave new world here. And I would say in the last 5 years, AI has gone from sort of cutting edge, brave new world to maximum hype, maximum noise. Everybody's, visualizing with AI. Everybody's got a big data solution. You throw a rock in South of Market and you will hit a data infrastructure startup. So what's the, is that a tailwind? Is that a headwind? Is it an impediment? Is it helping you? Like, how is that, since your startup has kind of tracked that 5-year period, how have you seen the sort of the general market sentiment about AI affect your business?
It's definitely been a major tailwind for us in two ways. The first is obviously GPUs, right? So MapD was built from the ground up to run on GPUs. We can actually run on CPUs, but our main value proposition is running on graphics cards. And so they were kind of a niche back then, right? People were like, why are you doing that? Nobody knows about these things. And a lot of enterprises found them to be exotic, and how do we deploy these things? They weren't really available in the major clouds except for some niche applications. And so the great thing is that the AI revolution has propelled GPUs forward and made them almost ubiquitous. So we go to customers, not just the hedge funds or oil and gas where you'd expect, or Facebook or Google. I'm talking like GM, for example, has major investments in GPUs. And all the major clouds have GPUs. So it's certainly made it much easier and less exotic for us to actually get our software solution out there. And if you look at NVIDIA stock price, NVIDIA is a 3-time investor in MapD. We're very close to them. Basically, I was telling them, I have some friends there, and they're like, oh, should I sell my stock? This is when they were $20. And I was like, no, this is going to be huge, and now it's like 250. So they haven't given me any, but they should thank me.
We are not registered financial advisors. Do not take stock picking advice.
Exactly. Well,
you're on your own.
The other thing I want to say, though, is a broader thing is that I think AI is actually a data problem. So everybody talks about the algorithms, right? And those are indeed important, and the hardware you run them on, and accelerating the training process. But if you look at the data science space, right, a lot of it is actually about data engineering. It's about being able to query and understand your data. Think about all the visualization tools and how they interact with, interoperate with R or Python. And so I think MapD has a big role to play there, and we've seen kind of, we've gained in popularity as kind of a sidecar for that to allow people to understand their data so they can actually do feature engineering better for their models. And in fact, a year ago, we actually co-founded the GPU Open Analytics Initiative, Go AI, with NVIDIA, H2O.ai, and Anaconda, formerly Continuum Analytics. And the idea is we're all running on these GPUs. Let's actually take the result sets of a SQL query, a multi-billion record result set, and without copying it, use Apache Arrow to transfer that to an H2O XGBoost model or TensorFlow or Torch, and then be able to get those trained results back into MapD. So I think there's a larger data story here that is a big part of our future.
I couldn't agree with you more that AI is really a story of data. And I talk to so many data scientists and machine learning people who say, I started a job at a new company. They wanted me to build a data science team. They expected me to start, creating all these crazy insights. And little did they know, the first thing I had to do was accumulate and clean and prepare all the data. Yeah. And that kind of preparation of the data, that's 80% of the work is there, right? Yeah. Before you can get to anything cool. And so I'm curious, does the data already have to be sort of accumulated and clean and prepared before MapD can do anything useful with it? Can you be helpful in that process, or are you also downstream of it?
So we're somewhat downstream of it, right? We're not an ETL tool, and we are fundamentally a relational database platform under the hood. And I think that's okay. Usually we're talking to customer about their highest value data sets. So people obviously have petabytes of data coming from everywhere, and a lot of it's unstructured, and that's why you had the whole NoSQL revolution, which completely has its place. But I think where we kind of come in is hey, we have these high value data sets that we've probably spent years cleaning and optimizing. Think of call data records, or kind of ad spend, or ad auction data, or it's telemetry data coming off of cars. And so it's more a matter of we want to get that last mile of value from that data by being able to do either operational processes where we can crunch this data and make real-time stock market bids off of it, or we want to actually get human interactive insights. We want to augment our human workforce to be able to get insights faster. One of our customers, Jam City, this big medium-sized gaming company, said basically it's we would love to use AI, but in fact, it's so special purpose, and we have people who are such experts, we actually get more value out of people just quickly being able to use, say, MapD to slice and dice the data, and they actually get real lift out of being able to do this because they say, oh, we can actually put ad spend there instead of here, or this country, or this demographic, that kind of thing.
Oh, that's really interesting. What are, helping startups monetize their businesses by placing ads correctly is, I think, a pretty conventional use of AI and big data visualization. What are some of the more interesting and cool use cases that would be more sort of surprising?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So one of my favorite customers, who again I would not have expected to jump on kind of the advanced analytics AI, GPU bandwagon, was Fannie Mae, right? So Fannie.
And does everybody know Fannie Mae? You want to quickly explain what Fannie Mae is?
Fannie Mae is one of the, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are one of the kind of two quasi-public mortgage security backers in the United States, and I'm probably not the foremost expert on this. But basically most, I don't know what percentage of mortgages in the US are actually backed by Fannie, but they were established by the US government to make sure that particularly lower income families could have access to good mortgage loans. So I think after the financial crisis, a lot of what they're doing is that they've had an increased focus on making sure that they make the right loans, or that they know the risk of their loans. And that's very much a big data problem, kind of like Orr was talking about before, and he probably knows way more about this than me. But basically they have hundreds of variables and maybe even more that they're looking at using MapD and using kind of machine learning. And they've been able to use that to hopefully boost a little bit of the accuracy and insight they have into what differentiates a good loan from a bad loan.
Oh, that's really cool. I know that NVIDIA is an investor in your company, and that obviously your technology is architected to work with GPUs. What is your take on the rise of sort of custom ASICs? Like, you know, we went from a world where GPUs were fringe to GPUs are totally mainstream because they're great for AI to actually we need to create completely custom, AI is so big, we're going to create completely custom silicon for it and, you know, have chips that are designed for deep learning, that are designed for deep reinforcement learning. What is your take on this? Is this going to sort of, is this complementary to GPUs? Are we going to see less use for sort of GPUs and more specialized chips out there?
I think it's mostly complementary. I mean, look, AI is going to be such a huge transformative space and industry that, of course, there's going to be multiple approaches to it, both from hardware and software perspective, and I think that's a good thing. So, you know, always, as with any custom silicon versus general programmable hardware, there's trade-offs, right? So Google can get better efficiency because these ASICs are specifically, the tensor processing units, for example, are specifically made to do TPUs or made to do some of these workloads. On the other hand, I think if you're a researcher and you're trying to really get deep and figure out a better model, you're going to be fundamentally limited. I know they're getting more programmable, but you're going to be fundamentally limited by what, say, a TPU can do. And then finally, you know, because it's Google making these TPUs, obviously they're only available right now to the general public in Google Cloud, and versus anybody can get an NVIDIA GPU and run it on premises. So I think they perform different roles, and I think NVIDIA, as you've seen, and they've added tensor cores, they've added TPU-like things to their own graphics processing units. I think you'll find that they'll add more and more specialized hardware so that there'll be some convergence. The ASICs getting more generally programmable in different ways, and then the GPUs actually getting more, having more specialized hardware for deep learning.
Very good. Switching gears to talk a little bit about your business model. Like many infrastructure companies, you have a partially open source, it's open core, right?
Yeah.
And a partially sort of enterprise for-profit product line part of the business. How do you think about balancing those two? How do you make sure that the open source offering is not anemic, but yet also doesn't cannibalize your enterprise opportunity?
Absolutely, that's a really great question. So we're an interesting case study because we actually didn't start open source. I kind of wanted to open source from the beginning, but you know, maybe early on there wasn't broad support, you know, with investors for that kind of model. When we took our B round with NEA led it, I think we all converged on the idea that, you know, the infrastructure part of MapD needs to be open. And part of that was just me feeling like, you know, I, like so many people who work in the tech space, have benefited enormously from open source software. So I have a aesthetic or philosophical leaning towards open source, that it creates better software, that people want to not be locked into vendors. And so I think what I realized is that both, you know, I feel better about it, but also customers prefer to consume software in a, you know, at least somewhat open source manner. That said, you know, as you said, at the end of the day, we are a for-profit business, and I think the two can very much coexist. So in MapD's case, we basically open source most of the core database. There are obviously enterprise bells and whistles around security, HA, scale out that are not open source. But we were kind of lucky in that a lot of our value or a lot of our revenue comes from our visual analytics capabilities. So this is being able to slice and dice billions of rows interactively, the rendering capabilities. And so we actually concentrate on that being more proprietary, but the core platform being open source. And that gets adoption. And I think we found that it's been a huge win for us as a business, simply because people who wouldn't have wanted to come through the normal enterprise sales cycle have tried it and then maybe tried it for 3-6 months, not a normal POC process. But then they come back and they say, hey, we've actually almost put this into production, but now we need these things that you have, and we need support, and we need your visualization capabilities.
In hindsight, do you think you should have been open source from the beginning?
That's a hard, the counterfactual is hard to judge. I think it was actually good. I mean, our product platform, I think, is an ambitious enough roadmap where it's taken us many years to get to a point where I just feel like we're kind of enterprise ready and out there, and there's still more that people want and need out of us. But if we had done it from the very beginning, I'm not sure, people would have said, hey, that's interesting, but it's not ready for prime time yet. So I think we did it at the right time when we were proud of what we were releasing to the world.
So I want to close with a question about trust in AI, just like I've asked each of your predecessors here on the stage. And so in this world where AI is becoming more and more powerful, it's taking over everything from, am I going to get a mortgage from Fannie Mae, to, what ads am I going to see while I'm playing games, to what is the rent in my condo? How should we think about trust in the system? And as practitioners, how should we think about making the system more trustworthy?
Yeah, so I think that's one of the things about AI, and it was brought up earlier, right? Where essentially, AI can often be this black box, and more people are wanting to unmask that black box, both to understand why it's making certain decisions, but there's actually a deeper regulatory reason. Could the AI be very biased, right? Is it making racist or some kind of discriminatory decision? So that's where I think actually MapD has a role to play, and we didn't really anticipate this from the beginning, but the cool thing about open source is people just use you in ways that the marketing or sales team could never dream up. So Volkswagen, for example, found our open source and basically said, hey, we have all these both AI and just ML models, right? And sometimes we have no clue why they're making decisions, whether that's who to give an incentive for to buy a new car, or even just, is a car part going to fail?
Why are we passing these emissions tests?
Exactly. I'm not going to make the joke.
No comment.
Yeah. They asked our sum function to actually only return 70% of, it's a joke. So these are good people. And so the interesting thing is they actually started using MapD so they train these models, and then they use it in a dense way to actually take every potential input into the system, not just the input that was in the original data set, but like a multi-dimensional dense grid of inputs, and actually being able to run SQL queries over like the multi-billion row result sets and also visualize it, and they can actually find correlations in it, which says, oh, we're actually somehow, what was the thing before that you brought up, Catherine? Basically, we're discriminating in some way where we're saying, oh, we're not giving loans to this protected class or something like this.
Oh, man is to woman.
Yeah,
the
exactly.
man is to woman as programmer is to homemaker.
They can actually systematically look at all the inputs and say, okay, there's this correlation with the output. So that's been pretty cool, and I think it's actually a nice use for our system.
So you can actually, using your system, researchers can actually bring explainability to their models.
Can bring explainability to their models. And that's a big thing, because often to do this, they're looking at these huge data sets of every dense input point, and they can quickly both visually see and programmatically see correlations that really shouldn't be there.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much.
No,
really
appreciate
your time.
Thanks.
This was fascinating.
Yeah.